Thank you so much for the introduction and above all for the honor of addressing this extremely distinguished forum. It's interesting that the two state leaders that have preceded me both called attention to their academic background, and I, of course, am continuing not with the governmental responsibilities that they have, but in a sense proceeding with the title of this forum. I would like to make sure that all right, so I was given this challenge, Inside the Minds That Shape Your Tomorrow, and it is a daunting title. I was given 15 minutes to talk about it, and it was a challenge to think about it. So let me begin with the fact that a lot of the public discourse about what's going to shape our tomorrow, in fact, takes minds out of the picture and suggests that very soon human minds will, in a sense, be rendered irrelevant, that we will achieve this state, which, since Ray Kurzweil popularized the term early in this century, it's been called the singularity. At that moment, human minds will be joined together with computerized minds to achieve a degree of power that we cannot even imagine at the moment. That's just a random selection of titles that use the term singularity, but I hope it conveys some sense of the grip that this idea of the singularity has on Silicon Valley and the kinds of innovations that we're producing through artificial intelligence. Elon Musk has declared this year to be the year that singularity comes into being. I would like to bracket a statement here that most of the authors, all of the authors I've been able to dig up, have been men. And I wonder whether the speed and the appeal, the sort of elixir of power that goes with the idea of singularity would have seemed different if the men producing this imagination had bathed a baby, or browned some onions for putting on biryani, or built the institutions of justice in devastated countries after a genocide. These things take time, and I think even training the minds that are creating your tomorrow is something that should take time. It's interesting that no fewer than 2 of the leaders of the Silicon Valley giants are dropouts from my university. And so these are Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates long before Zuckerberg came into the picture. But the world that they have created for us, or helped create for us, was denounced yesterday by the Prime Minister of Spain in a powerful address in which he referred to it as a failed state. So it is not necessarily the case that leapfrogging ahead with these minds that are the dropouts from my university necessarily creates the tomorrow that we should all be looking forward to. Right, so this task was a very ambiguous demand. What does inside the mind mean? Does it mean what is inside these minds that I get to train? Or how can we get inside the minds, which is a teacher's duty and challenge? Or the normative question, what should be inside these minds that are shaping our tomorrow? And I will come to each of these questions in turn, but I think the third one, what should be inside these minds, is perhaps the most important challenge. And my own experience for talking about this comes from almost a half century of involvement in some of the premier institutions of the United States and its educational system. I taught at Cornell University for 20 years, from 1978 to 98, and I've been teaching at Harvard ever since. But Harvard and MIT are deeply interlinked, and because of the subject that I teach, science, technology, and society, I get a lot of migrants from MIT coming into my courses at Harvard. So that is my background for addressing these questions. So the first question, what is inside these minds? Over my decades of teaching, I have noticed that the minds that I teach are slipping more into the system that the late psychologist and Nobel laureate economist Daniel Kahneman referred to as System 1 thinking, thinking fast. So this is the kind of thinking that lives in these oversaturated information environments and is very rapid. Knowledge is thought to be at one's fingertips. Everything is wide open to the world, and one just has to pick and choose. And that kind of learning, that kind of knowledge making is fast, it's instinctive, it's often emotional, and I think you will all recognize that this has a kind of appeal in today's digitized world. But the balance of human thinking, according to Kahneman, lay in the interaction between that system 1 of thinking fast and the system 2 of thinking slow. And I think that we're losing out in the ability to train the minds that are going to shape our tomorrows to think slow, to be recursive. Why is the law so powerful? It builds on precedent. It goes back. It's continually re-asking the questions about justice and fairness that should be of concern to us all, revisiting those concepts in the light of technological change. And I reject the idea that technology is just going ahead faster than law can keep up. It's partly because we have enabled technology to go ahead without creating the legal infrastructures. There was no reason a priori why data should have been considered the property of the companies that took our data from us. Most of us didn't even know that the data were being collected, let alone that the data had value and could be used in certain ways. The laws enabled that. It enabled a kind of extractive economy in which we are the sites of mining and the data users are the miners. But the law pre-existed. It enabled a set of developments, and it would be a mistake to think that the law is always lagging. It's a question, in what respects is it choosing to lag? And that is something that I think requires slow thinking and a continual revisitation of the territory of justice. Secondly, how does one get inside these minds? So if any of you have been in academia at all recently, you will know that one of the big challenges we face now is artificial intelligence and the use of AI tools to do the kinds of work that previously people thought human minds should be doing. You can plug in any written text and get a summary back. So if one way of teaching people to think was to give them a piece of writing and ask them to think critically about what it means, now people can go to AI and get a synopsis back, and they think that this is more objective, clearer. They sometimes justify it by saying, well, it's written in English and I don't have to struggle with a second language. There are all kinds of temptations to be outsourcing the quality of thought to this artificial intelligence. And anybody who's taught in academia for a number of years knows attention spans are decreasing. People cannot write paragraphs, they cannot think in paragraphs, and therefore the whole capacity to reflect critically is, in a sense, getting reduced as we proceed on this route of entrusting our minds to AI more and more. So how does one actually capture those minds and try to get inside them when they're impatient, when they would rather be shopping for shoes during class time, and when they're building their, their social networks, often with ideas of what their next job internship will be, instead of paying attention to what is being discussed and said in class. This is a challenge, and I think this is, if I had more time, I would talk about strategies, but it is something that one should keep in mind as one looks at the spectrum of universities and sees what are the growth areas and what are the degrowth areas. The degrowth areas are the ones that foster Kahneman's thinking slow. The growth areas are the ones that foster thinking fast. So we're creating an imbalance in our efforts to get inside the minds of tomorrow. Let's now get normative and think about what should be inside these minds. And I will just flag 4 ways that I think we might address this question of normativity. The first, which has to some extent been alluded to already, is interdisciplinarity. We have to learn to think across different areas of training. The second, I will call cosmopolitanism. The third is what I call technologies of humility. And the fourth is a sense of limits. And very quickly, let me just hint at what I mean by these things. So interdisciplinarity is often thought of as people from one discipline collaborating with people from another discipline to find solutions to humanity's grand challenges. If you have any experience of doing interdisciplinary work, you recognize that disciplines are kind of accidental, the way nation states are, the way islands are. And in fact, the ocean of ignorance is far bigger than the islands of disciplinarity. So interdisciplinarity, to me, means something very different. It's not collaborating to find solutions where people already know what is inside the paradigms. It's using these paradigmatic islands of knowledge to question each other. It's not to get better solutions, it is to develop the capacity to ask better questions. Cosmopolitanism. This is something that I think is more apparent to people who come from less powerful countries in a way. And less powerful countries can mean gender. It can mean being a woman in a man's academic world. It's well understood by anthropologists that people at the less powerful ends of the scale develop a far better understanding for the hierarchies above them than the above hierarchies do of the cultures below them. Cosmopolitanism, to me, means cultivating a sensibility that allows people of any cultural position to understand the foundations and prerequisites of the cultural beliefs of people that they have not met and whom they have not learned to understand and articulate. I do this in my own work through comparative work, comparing national responses to different kinds of problem areas, but I think this is a much deeper stance that needs to be cultivated in the minds that we're preparing for tomorrow. The third is this idea of technologies of humility. One of the reasons that people are so enamored of artificial intelligence and of computerized work in general is that they think that just chewing up all the data in the world will give us a better understanding of how to move forward, that we will get more impartial and more objective solutions. We know from the social sciences that this is true only in a limited sense, because we have to accept the questions as given in order to evaluate the answers. Technologies of humility, to me, is a stance that encourages one to think about what we don't know, and what we don't know often has to do with justice, because it has to be about understanding who the losers will be and not just who the winners will be. It may seem strange in retrospect that we have created this world of the internet in which disinformation abounds. But supposing people had really sat down and thought what it means to take one's fleeting idea of the moment and immediately communicate it to 10 people, 100 people, 100,000 people, we do live in a country where the most powerful people control the means to reach millions of people at a time in one tweet. But how well thought out and reflected is that tweet? And why did we not think that communication could expand the domain of hate as well as the domain of love and understanding? This is something we might have been able to think through. So one should consider the implications, and those images, to me, represent humility. The one on the right is from a painting of Caravaggio, the famous Renaissance Italian painter, who depicted people coming to worship in front of Mary and Jesus, but with their feet covered in soil. And this idea of the barefoot person, to me, is emblematic of the kind of stance that people should take towards their own knowledge, even though it is amplified through all of the computerized power at our fingertips. Last but not least, the question of a sense of limits. How far should we go? This is not a question to be left to computers. This is a question that we must confront all the time. So, for instance, yesterday I heard a talk, not the first by any means because I work on biotechnology, in which the capacity of gene editing to enhance human beings was front and center. And one of the traits that we can now genetically edit was given as an example, to produce people who need less sleep. Once again, as somebody who has actually raised children, I wonder, did people think of a world in which the babies would only be sleeping, genetically engineered to sleep only 4 hours a night, let's say? I mean, maybe when these little babies grow up, they will be better soldiers on the battlefield because they will only need 4 hours of sleep. And I'm not joking, because the sponsor of this kind of research is indeed the military in my country, among other things. So a set of capacities is being generated and built in as enhancement, as something that we should be doing without a discussion of what the normative limits might be. And this is the kind of idea that I think needs to be challenged. Nirvana was not achieved in a day. Rome, we are told, was not built in a day. I dare say the institutions of justice in Kosovo and Macedonia were not built in a day, and Britain's unwritten constitution has taken 1,000 years to elaborate, and still is being elaborated all the time. Therefore, I think, to go back to the ambiguous question that I was given, why universities must be in this mix of discussion, is that we are dealing with the minds that will be in conversation with these machines. We must know what's inside those minds. We must have ways of getting inside those minds, and we must have a role in shaping what goes into those minds. That is a place and a role for collective deliberation by all of the combined wit and wisdom that the WGS brings together. And with that, let me thank you.